Colleagues, we're now moving to the last session before lunch, I believe, so I know you're thinking already of the delicious food that awaits you, but we've got food for thought here in this session. I'm going to ask the panelists to come to the podium. And you all know who you are, so if you could all come, and I'll introduce you as you come. That will save a bit of time. I know we're lucky to have Monica Coloma, Ambassador at Large for Financing for Development of the Government of Spain. We're all coming in different ways. We've got Rodrigo Salvado, Director General Operational Partnership Department, Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. We've got Diana Smallridge, Chief Executive Officer, Momentus. We've got Mahmoud Mohadeen, UN Special Envoy for the 2030 Agenda. Now, have I missed anyone? We've got His Excellency Lamine Dibba, Ambassador of the Gambia to the UN as well. And I believe also online we have Bala Yunusa, Senior Technical Advisor, Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on SDGs, Nigeria. So thank you, colleagues, for joining. This is going to be an exciting session. Thank you, Rodrigo. The title isn't necessarily the most exciting title, but behind it lies a real conundrum. And we've been talking about integrated national financing frameworks, how they're country-led, how they're development outcome focused, how they're integrated and holistic. This entails a level of collaboration, I think, that is a step change in the way that the community working on finance for sustainable development has worked in the past. We've heard about collaboration across government, how the more development-oriented policy parts of government, whether they be gender, climate, social sectors, and the more financial policy parts of government, ministries of finance, ministries of industry, commerce, those involved with foreign direct investment, private sector development, have to work together in new ways. That's just in government. We've been talking about tax, about budgets, but it's also about how government and private sector works together behind this common set of development priorities. And then it's also about how public development banks, whether they be multilateral, global, regional, or national, work together with this set of actors towards financing sustainable development. And it's also about how international finance institutions and the UN work together to support countries in delivering on these priorities. Frankly, that's a lot of collaboration to put together. That requires a whole set of different platforms to come together behind integrated national financing frameworks. And that's the question this illustrious panel is addressing. How do we bring these different platforms together in ways that still deliver behind country leadership, development outcomes, and more holistic integrated approaches to financing? So it's a difficult question that we have to answer. There is some text in the Finance for Development outcome document that I'm sure our colleagues have read and may allude to. We'll certainly be looking together in the discussion on how we can strengthen that. What is it that might suggest we need to do together moving forward? So with that lengthy and convoluted introduction to a very complex but exciting session, I'm going to ask Monica to go first, please. Monica, how do we address this question? What's the answer? No, you've got 5 minutes. It's a very difficult question.
Bueno.
You don't need to.
Sorry.
Sort of does it.
Voy la primera. Thomas, thank you so much. I have to speak in Spanish. I just shared my intervention with the team because we are in Spain, and for us it's important. I will try to do it clearly for all of you to understand me. But thank you, Thomas, for this invitation, for the organization of this seminar, the workshop, pero also las gracias a la Generalitat por acogernos tan espléndidamente en este espléndido Palacio Real. Sin duda, esta es para nosotros una conversación clave. I'm talking in English. Yes. Una conversación clave y os agradecemos, Thomas, que contéis con nosotros en esta mesa, con estas brillantes mentes que nos acompañan y una audiencia distinguida para efectivamente intentar responder esta pregunta que nos haces. La secretaria de Estado ayer, ¿no?, nos decía que estábamos estratégicamente ubicados entre la Facultad de Derecho y la Facultad de Economía. Yo al llegar hoy veía la Facultad de Química enfrente. Yo creo que esto es una cuestión de química, ¿no? Necesitamos química también en la respuesta a esta pregunta, química entre distintas herramientas que tienen que dialogar. O sea, nosotros tenemos muy claro el diagnóstico y la solución, y es el diálogo, el trabajo conjunto, la complementariedad. Nos preguntabas por el Zero Draft. Nuestra valoración a este respecto es positiva. Vemos que el Zero Draft hace un llamamiento a alinear la financiación para el desarrollo con plataformas lideradas por los países como los INFFs, claramente lo señala, y hace un llamamiento a un trabajo conjunto de los MDBs, de los bancos públicos de desarrollo, del sistema de Naciones Unidas, de los actores bilaterales, del sector privado. Vemos potencial en el Zero Draft, Thomas. Y esta oportunidad, ¿por qué esta oportunidad de colaboración? Porque nosotros consideramos que los INFFs han demostrado ser un marco estratégico donde es útil como forma de alinear el trabajo con los recursos de financiación para el desarrollo con las prioridades nacionales, y así se ha venido demostrando en la medida en que desde la Action Agenda de Addis Abeba 85 países han adoptado estos marcos. Pero, por su parte, las Country Platforms son también una herramienta muy útil, constituye el mecanismo operativo en el que múltiples actores permiten coordinar, movilizar y gestionar recursos en un marco de acción conjunta. Entonces, para nosotros la clave es transformar las prioridades estratégicas definidas en los INFFs en acciones concretas que se materializan en los Country Platforms. Con respecto a estas sinergias, ¿qué sinergias vemos? ¿En qué tres áreas podemos trabajar en ese diálogo necesario entre INFFs y Country Platforms? Uno, la alineación estratégica y operativa. Los INFFs priorizan necesidades de financiación a nivel nacional alineadas con los ODS, y las Country Platforms constituyen un espacio para movilizar y coordinar esos recursos. Si conseguimos trabajar juntos, complementariamente, creando sinergias, vamos a favorecer, minimizar duplicidades, optimizar recursos y mejorar el impacto en nuestras actuaciones. Dos, una segunda área donde vemos esta complementariedad, en el fortalecimiento de la planificación inclusiva. Si vamos a un enfoque inclusivo que incorpore a todos los actores relevantes, vamos, tanto nacionales, locales, sector privado, organismos internacionales, sociedad civil. Esto permite reflejar mejor lo que son la propia realidad de los países, lo que son sus propias prioridades nacionales y locales, pero al mismo tiempo favorecer la transparencia y la rendición de cuentas. Y, en tercer lugar, ese trabajo complementario nos va a permitir una catalización de inversiones privadas con mayor eficacia. Los INFFs proporcionan ese marco normativo y estratégico que permiten alinear las inversiones con las prioridades nacionales y los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Y las Country Platforms nos permiten ese diálogo necesario entre los gobiernos y los inversores. Entonces, trabajando juntos, catalizamos mejor las inversiones. Entonces, finalmente, nosotros creemos que es clave en el tener esa conversación estratégica con los MDBs, y agradezco mucho pues, que se haya hecho este esfuerzo para que Rodrigo esté con nosotros, para que esté también el World Bank, que esté también el IDB y otros MDBs, para favorecer, ¿no?, el que vayan identificando los INFFs como una referencia en sus estrategias de inversión y en sus country platforms, Y un poco por cuestiones de tiempo, voy a cerrar aquí con un mensaje final. Tomás, para nosotros este encuentro es un llamamiento fundamental en el camino a Sevilla. O sea, os agradecemos realmente que hayáis puesto este tema en este camino a Sevilla, donde nosotros desde España, como host country, estamos intentando pues, posicionarnos en temas que vemos que son, uno, clave para Sevilla, pero dos, transformadores en lo que es nuestra forma de actuar. Y vemos en este diálogo necesario, esta complementariedad entre INFF y Country Platforms, vemos una materialización de la necesaria colaboración más estrecha entre la Agenda de Naciones Unidas, entre la acción de Naciones Unidas y los MDBs. Y con este espíritu constructivo y de diálogo me quedo aquí. Gracias, Tomás.
Thank you so much, Monica. That was super clear, incredibly constructive, and the perfect way to begin the panel in earnest. I'm now going to pass to His Excellency Lamine Diba, Ambassador of the Gambia to the UN. Please, sir, your perspectives.
Hello, yeah. Well, thank you very much again. I think this is a very interesting and important forum where the INFFs and the country platforms should be mutually reinforcing. The fact that we are looking for resources to finance our national development priorities, and the INFF framework is also there to enhance domestic resource mobilization to finance development priorities. So you can see the convergence of the two if only there is one coordination among the INFF framework and the country platforms to be able to share information on the critical issues that the country leadership identifies as priority. So here prioritization is very important. And when the country prioritizes, it is now the leadership. And one very important thing in the whole process is ownership, the country ownership. And this matters a lot because this is where you are able to identify your development needs and aspirations, but also correspondingly looking at the resources that are required to be able to achieve those milestone developments is very critical. And so therefore, the nexus between the two is very, very central in bringing about the desired development of the needs of the country. That is one. Two, for purpose of planning, because they will tell you, if you don't plan, you plan to fail. Now, for countries to plan well and look at their country development plans and build in the INFF as a platform, as a process of acquiring resources domestically and also coordinating among all the donors, bilateral, multilateral, private funds, and bringing all of them into one basket is also very critical. So how do you know that you are progressing? So the monitoring mechanism that is established by the INFF and the country framework is very, very important. So now all the key development players within the country economic sector need to work together and share this information. And I very much like what you just said, inclusivity. It's not only at the supranational level that all this planning need to be done, but it must be coordinated and decentralized at the level of the local communities whose needs and aspirations is the primary duty and responsibility of government. And therefore, as primary duty bearer, government, you need to lead, but also you need to take what matters from the people. Because for instance, sometimes you want to build a school for, for the community. You may not know what are the priorities of that community. The government has a policy to develop education sector, the health sector, but the community also have their specific needs. So there, coordinating from different level, micro level, meso level, and macro level is very, very important. So therefore, it will be a flow from meso, macro, meso and macro. So this is very important. So within the global multilateral system also, building national priorities into regional priorities matters. So the INFF can help to support, but whereas the country platform already identify those priorities. So based on that, it is important to coordinate among themselves and therefore monitor what is happening. Monitoring and evaluation also matters between the two, and they will be mutually reinforcing and supporting each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of our ambassadors for those excellent remarks, which I think have shown both the complexity but the necessity of this collaboration across multiple actors and multiple levels. Now, we're going to get a bit more practical as we go through the panel and hopefully get to some examples of how this might work in practice. I'm hopeful that online we have Bala Yunusa, who is now going to take us into the perspective of the Office of the President on the SDGs in Nigeria. Bala, are you there? It's that moment of hope. Yes. Now, can we hear you, Yala? Let's see. Yala, can you give us a word? Hello? You
See you again.
Yeah! Well, round of applause. Brilliant, Bala. So wonderful to have you online and audible. That's great. I hope you've been able to hear what we're talking through here. So I'm going to go straight to you. What are your perspectives on this topic, Bala, from Nigeria?
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, and grateful for the opportunity for Nigeria to be on this panel to share our insights on the INFF and country platforms. I would just like to begin by arguing that the commitment to design and implement the integrated national financing framework is part of the broader Nigeria's commitment towards the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and of course the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Financing Development. Our unique institutional framework through the coordinating mandate of the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development Goals enable us to, since 2016, work closely with key stakeholders from the public sector, private sector, civil society, as well as the United Nations Development System broadly to institutionalize the Sustainable Development Goals. And since 2019, when Nigeria, through the Office of the Senior Special Assistant to the President on Sustainable Development, was committed to the design and implementation of the Integrated National Financing Framework, we had since, prior to that 2019, began the realignment of the national statistical system with the requirements and indicators of the SDG so that we're able to then track progress through our national statistical system. We had also, by 2019, customized and domesticated our integrated sustainable development goals model, which is a homegrown analytical tool that enables us to do SDG-based development planning at the national and at the subnational level. And of course, by that 2019, again, we had conducted the first voluntary national review in 2017, and then we're planning to do the second one in 2020. And also we had begun the process of independent country-led evaluation of priority SDGs. I've taken time to provide this background to demonstrate Nigeria's commitment to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development by institutionalizing frameworks so that we understand that the INFF is just a continuation of that commitment. And by the time in 2019 we decided to design and implement Nigeria's integrated national financing framework, we began by conducting the development finance assessment at the national level with the aim of mapping out the entire financing ecosystem to understand where the sources of finance will come to fund our sustainable development. But it is also important to understand that the sustainable development goals have all been integrated into our medium and long-term development planning process since 2016. We had the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan that lasted between 2017 and 2020. And of course, the current medium-term National Development Plan, 2021 to 2025. So all this taken together are frameworks institutionalized to guarantee the effective implementation of the 2030 Agenda and the SDGs. And the design and implementation of the INFF is the continuation of that commitment. Now, how do we operationalize the design and implementation of the INFF in Nigeria? That began with formal signification of commitment, and obviously the facilitation of the establishment of two strategic committees, the National Steering Committee as well as the co-working group. The National Steering Committee, it's a multi-stakeholder, top-level or high-level committee chaired by the Honorable Minister of Finance, and then supported by the Honorable Minister of Budget and Economic Planning, the United Nations Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator, and the representatives from the Central Bank, the Nigerian Governors Forum, the Budget Office of the Federation, the multilateral and bilateral partners, the World Bank, IMF, European Union, of course, supporting UNDP with funding and technical support. So this National Steering Committee provide overarching, if you like, strategic guidance for the design and implementation of the Nigeria's INFF. Beneath that, we have the co-working group, which is now the technical arm of the steering committee. So that co-working group mimic the institutional membership of the National Steering Committee, and that is where some of us operate from. Is chaired by the senior director in the Ministry of Finance, Budget and Economic Planning, and then co-chaired by senior economic advisor from UNDP. What the technical committee does is to provide technical leadership in operationalizing the Nigeria's INFF. We had completed the report and launched the INFF report in 2022, September to be precise. And we just, due to change in government and priorities, and also the reality of the political economy, we have also, the co-working group has just completed the guidance on the revision of the roadmap, as well as the M&E framework. And as soon it will be presented for the consideration and approval of the National Steering Committee for it to be implemented. But we had since begun to implement key initiatives and programs to ensure that we effectively implement the Nigeria's INFF. And some of this include the subnational development finance assessment. Nigeria has a huge implementation context where we have 36 states and the Federal Capital Territory. And below that, we have the 774 local governments. So we are doing subnational development finance assessments across key states across the 6 geopolitical zone. We've also commenced enhancing the tax administration by leveraging on technology. We are also supporting the investment promotion and enabling business environment, knowing fully that one of the easiest way to mobilize additional resources to finance our sustainable development is through the domestic public sources. Once we strengthen that, we are able to, because since 2016, we have seen a strange pattern The public sector is about 10 to 15% of the GDP every year. And therefore, we have 85 to 90% of the resources that are outside of the public sector, and we must do everything humanly possible within the framework of the INFF to mobilize these private resources to finance Nigeria's sustainable development. We're
Brilliant.
working to increase private sector inflow into the public sector to make sure that. So I will stop here for the sake of time, and then we're happy to provide useful insights as we progress. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Bala, for giving us some of the detail of how the INFF is structured in terms of governance and oversight, the engagement of different actors, including the UN and IFIs, the World Bank, IMF. Great to hear of the progress there. We're coming back to the room, and Mahmoud Mahadine, UN Special Envoy, really at the heart of FFD as well as SDGs. Really great to have you here. Please give us your pearls of wisdom on this topic.
Right, thank you so much. Pearls of wisdom, if I have them, would require time. So hours, minutes, or seconds. So tell me.
Mahmoud, I know what I say will be stretched, I'm going to say 5 minutes.
Yeah, welcome. Welcome to the land of pyramids and bargaining in Egypt. I was inspired by the first moderator today, trying to build pyramids. And so I like to leave you with a system of building pyramids that would last for 2030 and beyond. And I was asked as well to link the work on the integrated national financial frameworks with the country platforms. Integrated national financial frameworks could be traced back to the days that the world system was thinking of some sort of unified goals. It's not just recent discovery. It came from Monterey, and even there were some analytical work before that. Implementation of them is a recent thing, and thanks to the UN system and the many partners who pushed that to happen. Meanwhile, the country platforms is a G20 kind of invention that goes back to 2018, and now between the two, given that they were claimed now, that they are owned by countries, they can really guide internal coordination, prioritization, and leading dialogues with external partners, be them government or private sector. So imagine that your country is still committed to the 2015 SDGs priorities. You have a simple pyramid with a frame, which is basically the partnership as a frame. You cannot build it without governance. Add elements of infrastructure that brings areas related to SDG 6 and 7, for instance, water, sanitation, electricity. You need to build cities, SDG 11. Go up to areas of more importance than the BRICS, which is basically human capital, health, education, social protection, and of course, gender. So this is the pyramid getting smaller while we're going to the top, but more serious. Then go back up SDG 13, 14, 15. This is about climate and resilience. If you do all the things right, you will have the happy top of the pyramid. You are ending poverty, and you are achieving equity, SDG 1, SDG 10. This is basically the pyramid. How to do that? 3, investment of human capital, of infrastructure, including digital infrastructure, and investment in resilience. These are basically competition from now until the end of the day. If you have anything else that you can invest in, these are the summaries of priorities of investment in any countries. The poorest, who happen to be in Africa, to the richest, who happen to be in other parts of the world. So you get a consultant, like the case of Egypt, which I'm going to refer to its case, after perhaps being inspired, if you are a minister, by a report that was conducted by a group of 25 economists. This is a real case. So I'm talking here about a report called Finance for Development in Egypt, and you can find it by Googling it. And there was a chapter called Integrated National Financial Framework. Ministers were inspired by the whole Finance for Development exercise, but more on that particular chapter, because if you are thinking of a system, you have the SDGs, you need growth machinery, you need the 3 investment in human capital, infrastructure and resilience, and you need to see all of these investments, where is the money going to come from? Is it going to come from domestic system like savings or domestic resource mobilization through public revenue mobilization, or externally by private sector or ODA? So the only way to do that is by integrating the whole thing and aligning the priorities, as the ambassadors and our good friend from Nigeria with mentioning that it's a prioritization tool. So in the case of Egypt, after finishing that Finance for Development, they asked the UNDP, and my good friend, the UNDP representative, cited other friends of his by saying that he was happy to coordinate with other UN agencies, including UNCTAD, UN Women, UNICEF, ILO, and using that Finance for Development report as well as a reference. So first, you identify the gaps, how much you need. Think of that pyramid, the system, and the 3 investments. You need to invest. Health education, each one, roughly speaking, need 1% of GDP of Egypt, on average from 2021 backward to 2030 forward. Education, 0.72% of GDP. Women's empowerment, to the happiness of women in the room, it's the most demanding, 3% of GDP. This is the biggest. Sanitation, 0.5%, transportation, 2%, climate change, I think it's a little bit underestimated, especially if you're going to align it with the NDCs, but it says 1%. Let me believe that, but there is something. If I'm going to be asked a question why climate change, especially adaptation, is being underestimated, this is a bigger question. Social protection is 1%. Add that all together, we're about 9.5% of GDP per annum to achieve the SDGs. That is not very far from the estimates of the IMF. If you are a low-income country, you are expected to spend up to 15% of your GDP. If you are a middle-income country, like Indonesia, for instance, or Nigeria, a low-middle-income country, you are expected to spend anything between 5 to 8% of GDP. 9.5% for a low-middle-income country like Egypt is between those 2 ranges. How are you going to do the investments? They aligned all of what we spoke about yesterday. Remember, the public, the private, the domestic, the external, a bit of trade here, a bit of remittances there, some financial inclusion, and better debt management effectiveness. And they put that in a list to match the potential resources with the gaps of finance. If they do that properly, Egypt, my home and beloved country, shouldn't really have a debt crisis to manage today. If that was basically in the making from the very beginning, of the kind of work that will really be sending signals that the debt to GDP, always actually, this is for those of you who are working there, debt to GDP is one of the most misleading indicators, because you can always see it nice between 60%, you will think yourself a member of the European Union, and then suddenly you are in a debt crisis. 60%, 70%. Why? Because much more important indicator, which is basically the debt service to your receivable that you need really to focus on, not the debt to GDP. If you don't believe in that, in the case of a developing economy like Egypt, Mr. Furman and Larry Summers have a very nice paper about that. You can Google it, and actually they challenge that particular indicator. So here, this is very much FFD in action. The Addis Ababa agenda and the one in preparation for Seville need really to get this kind of learning by doing from 2015 until 2030. So it's an alignment exercise. Why we are seeing issues here of concern? Can I bring you more to the reality of matters? Because this kind of common sense approach, if I'm presenting it to Cairo University, they will love it because they like systems. They assume that kind of nice abstract world. When the Ministry of Finance loves the Ministry of Education is not fighting for resources against the Ministry of Health. This kind of tension is not there. The other thing, that the generous assumption, very generous assumption, that you may think, after living in 15 years between the World Bank and IMF, there are some interesting, healthy tensions between different international organizations. But sometimes it gets complicated because you get your integrated national financial framework and you would present it tomorrow to one of these MDBs. You say, well, I believe in it. I think our friend from AIB, he says, well, I love it because that's why he's here. Others, perhaps, I don't know what they're going to say, but this is a generous assumption. Surprise, surprise. Yeah, surprise, surprise. But other institutions say, well, this is a kind of a waste of time. We don't like it. We have something better. And this could be another 2 years that you would waste. So I would say here, this issue of country ownership, you are in Cairo, you are in Addis, you are in any country around the world, you say, well, this is what we believed in, not because we like the UNDP more or the UN system better, but basically, there's a kind of a collaborative way between our governments, between our departments. If you have something better, build on it. If you have something critically important, add to my knowledge, but don't give me an alternative way of doing it because this is going to be wasting my time because I have gaps to fund and you need resources, and all of that require some good attention. My final point. I was happily surprised that through this exercise, is not just matching the gaps with the potential revenue. It's basically getting matters related to adequate technical assistance to identify gaps of spending as a kind of possible ways to fund the gaps. And I got that through a good discussion that we had at the Holy See, the Vatican, when the Ministry of Finance of France was happy to report that through a technical assistance that cost them only $5 million to one African country, through the intelligent 4 or 5 people that they were using this money, they managed to identify areas of saving of around 240 million euros. And this is anyone who is working on budget, in planning, they know that overlap exists, that underlap exists as well. And matters related to getting these kind of scrutiny through better guidance by having adequate advisory from honest, knowledgeable advisors is, in many cases, more than the money itself. Having said that, if there is time, our great moderator will ask me why the costs related to sustainability and climate action is as low as 1% in the case of Egypt, which is not very different from other countries in Africa and the developing economies. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahmoud. We're left with images of pyramids and the excellent bartering and bargaining skills of the Egyptian people, because you certainly went over 5 minutes. Rodrigo.
Yes, sir.
Straight over to you.
Yeah, of course. Well, there's a lot going on, right? And I think, I'm going to repeat some of the things with them, but, for us, first of all, for those that you don't know, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank actually is the newest NDB that is there. We're going to be 10 years this year, actually. We are turning 10. But also, we are the largest in shareholders, in members after the World Bank. We have 110 members. And people might not know that actually we are the only, NDB with a global mandate that is majority owned by the Global South. So we can actually operate in any country that is our member. And we actually right now have like half of the African states actually are members of the AIB, and we have 8 in Latin America. So anyway, just to put it out there, and frankly, we are the largest capitalized NDB that there is there, so we don't have an issue on capital. So with that in mind, a couple of things. Again, we are a project bank, right? So I think the main thing here is that what do we do, right? And again, this is about like pipeline, right? So people that know me, they know I always say like my PPPs are pipeline. Tom is going to laugh about it, but it is true. And I think the question here also for Spain is how we actually tell people that we are doing something. How Sevilla is going to improve the life of people. What is that, before Sevilla was here, after I feel better about it. And in these times, with so much disbelief on multilateralism, unless we actually put some concrete stuff there, no one will believe us, right? So I think, we have both an opportunity and a room to actually fill that gap. But also, if we actually fail to do it, we are going to have in a very bad place. So I think in my mind, there has to be some playbook, right? And we are working with Tom and everything, which is okay, we have the first principle, but then we have to have a playbook to say, well, we are going to do stuff in these countries, and we are going to go there. So with that in mind, the question is how you get into these country platforms. And I have Tom, I'm going to do 3 initial conditions, and then 3 things that I think we have to do once we are in there. And these are based on our actually expertise and experience working in these things. Indonesia, Egypt, Bangladesh. The first thing is clarity. I don't think people know what is included and excluded in a country platform. And this is the problem with this INFF and the country platform, because some people believe that the priorities of the country should be discussed in the country platform. And that's not how I see it. We see that the country platform comes after, to actually get the resources to execute on the strategy of the country. I am the AIB. We are not like the World Bank in the sense that we don't have a huge amount of people looking at getting into the strategy side. We actually are a project bank. What we want is the pipeline. So we want a process, and actually this is with country ownership comes, which is my second initial condition, country ownership. The country platform is not a substitute for country ownership, and you can actually go, I am recorded on this?
Yeah.
Okay, so, but the thing is, so when you think about JETPs, right? You have 2 things. You have the Vietnam situation, you have the Indonesia situation. And the thing is, Indonesia was where the government was very clear what they wanted, right? I mean, they had actually an infrastructure plan really massive. And they don't really care if they call it JETP or not, right? I mean, the point is this is what they want to get done, and we need to figure it out. In the case of Vietnam, it was less so. And actually, there was an attempt or an aim or a hope that we are going to get there, do this, and substitute for, and it was some catch-up to do. Now they're getting better, but the reason why it's getting better is because, not because they don't get it right, it's because the government is getting it right. And this is the same thing with Brazil, right? Again, privatization is heavy-handed because the incentives are not coming from us. Unfortunately, we love that we sing Kumbaya together and we all love each other. We do. Sometimes, but it's not going to happen. You need to have the incentives. You think in the arrows of things, you can have all of us pointing arrows to one person. It's better if that person actually points arrows to us, right? So I think the second thing is country ownership. And again, do not call country platforms on places where the country ownership is not there, right? We can call it the INF, and you have to take the time. But then when you have the country platforms, where we are ready to go. And the third one is actually trust. And I would say that there are trust that we need at 2 levels. We were discussing with Monica this morning. It's going to be needed trust at the country level, which actually I believe there is more trust right now at the country level. And then we will need trust at the global level, which is another issue you are going to be finding in negotiating the FFD4 document. And I think we now find a problem there, because we see some trust happening at the country level. We need, in that sense, that trust to percolate up, to go up from where we are to the political decision makers and actually the negotiators. Otherwise, these things are going to get blocked there. So that's on the initial condition. Then on what we do. And I think there are 3 things in my mind what we need to do in terms of country platform. What are the things that the main gaps that we need to get right? The first one is project preparation, technical assistance. Again, a lot of these projects will not get to bankability if we don't pump in money. And this is actually on the private sector side. There is a lot of mismatch about what we mean by bankability. The NDBs, we have bankability on one side, but private sector is others. And we have a big gap right now in actually who pays for the term sheet of the private projects, right? Because there is a lot of people out there that they need to bring the term sheet to the sponsors, the commercial banks. But the commercial banks require, and there is a lot of disbelief of who should pay for it. So unless we don't understand and identify who will pay for that pre-feasibility to feasibility, we're going to have an issue. So the first one is technical capacity project preparation, and also pooling resources for preparing projects, which I think is amazing that we have not done in the past, because someone came with a brilliant idea that if we actually, prepare projects together, we were going to compete with each other. And it's stupid, because the problem that we have is that then when each of us prepare projects by our own, we are trying to push that to our co-financiers, and the co-financiers come to me, Rodrigo, you should come to me 2 years before, because you have all this due diligence that is useless, and then we have to redo it, right? So that idea is something there. The second one is de-risking. And again, de-risking, but understanding what de-risking means. Again, we are talking about de-risking, but it's like R&D risk, including with climate, right? There is political de-risking, there is actually counterpart risk. So it's a lot of risk that actually we are not, there's a lot of calling fire, but not you call the ambulance, you call the police, you call the firefighters, right? Like each of us, like Mia can do some of that, we can do some of that. Swiss-based companies that actually de-risk things can do better. So we need to do that. And probably that's part of the playbook, right? Who actually de-risk what? And then the third thing is actually policy-enabling environment. I think Mahmoud said that, many people said that yesterday, and I think yesterday also there were private sector actors here, sitting here, saying that that's an important thing, right? So we do policy, there's a lot of policy-based lending there, and Mahmoud can actually correct me, but we have been punching below our weight on that. We have not been using that to really push for the changes, a lot of moral hazard, so we need to unionize more across the providers of that to actually have a better negotiation with the government, because that's also very important. So I think some sort of coalition between the NDBs, the IMF, right, and then some others. And then the other thing, in these three things, the handshakes between us and the UN agencies is clear, right? Project preparation, technical assistance, we don't do that, right? UNOPS, you guys, you do that. The second one also on the risking, UNCDF, with first loss. Yesterday we had a discussion of first loss. The US has the UN Capital Development Fund. No one knows about it, right? Except for some people. So actually pumping more money in there. And then the last thing I would say is actually self-criticism for the NDBs, because we have been super difficult to work with, right? I always use this analogy of an alliance of airlines. 20 years ago, or 15 years ago, you have to go from point A to point B, and you have to do transfer, and then it was a nightmare, right? You have to actually change airlines, pick up your luggage, you have to change tickets. Now it's not like that. It's much easier. Why? Because you might be actually buying a ticket in United Airlines, but actually you are carried by Air China. And I know that because, I do a lot of Beijing thing. And you don't care, and you shouldn't care. So you say, I have to go from A to B. I don't care how you figure it out, guys. You figure it out. I want my luggage to go from A to B. I want, the ticket to, and we should operate more like that. So all these issues about having different due diligence, right? When you have to co-finance a project, when most of our shareholders are the same, I never understood it. I mean, why a shareholder that sits down in the Inter-American Development Bank says the Inter-American Development Bank is better than the World Bank, and then when you go and sit down in the World Bank, you say, no, the World Bank is actually better than the Inter-American Development Bank, so we are not going to trust them. EBRD, EIB, so there's a lot of overlap, so we need to be working on the mutual reliance, so you have a single due diligence where you do co-financing, or we do parallel financing. And this is a little bit technical, but the point is parallel financing, you have your own, each tranche of the financing has its own due diligence and everything. It's different from co-financing when everyone actually relies on the lead financier. So I think these are things that we are working on the NDB side, but also have to come from the shareholders. So again, to learn, I know you're giving me the signal of it, but so I think my sense is FAD4 should be about these things. Say, pick up a couple of countries and then go and work on that, right? We have a couple of candidates there. Let's do it. It's not that difficult, right? It's not that difficult, but we need to actually get together, hash it out. I mean, Andrew Steer from the Bezos Foundation has a sentence that I love, which is, we need a deal team for development. We really do. We really deal teams for development. People that know how to actually put this together. We have the expertise, that they take a corporate approach to these things, right? So we go for the first principle to actually the playbook, and I think that gives us a chance, a shot.
Great, thank you so much, Rodrigo. Taking us to the practical perspective of a multilateral development bank on the topic, and some great practical suggestions. Diana, you've been involved in this discussion at a country level. Please share your perspective.
Thanks, Tom. So I represent Momentous Global. It's an advisory firm, and we've worked with 3 countries on their INFFs, including Nigeria. I'll make a reference to that. But I want to pick up on, we talked about pyramids, but Mahmoud, you were speaking about the 4 quadrants of the INFF: public, private, domestic, international. And looking at that from a country platform perspective, I want to bring focus to one of the key players, I believe, in the INFF, which is the national development banks. National development banks are one of the species of public development banks that the Finance in Common is promoting, and there's a whole movement around that. But they stand alone as national development banks with country focus. So I see them, when you lay out this quadrant of domestic, public, which is obviously the tax and the expenditure and the planning and all the public financial management. When you look at the domestic private, which is the pension funds within the country, the local sources of capital, commercial banks, corporate CSR, whatever other, and then you look at the international side, international public, ODA, multilaterals, export credit agencies of this world who do a lot of sustainable finance lending. And then, of course, on the international private side, you've got the main players, the commercial banks, the remittances from diaspora, et cetera, the foundations, family offices. We actually work, apart from INFFs, with all these sources of finance and these players, and understanding their motivations, the reasons why they would want to be involved in financing SDG-aligned projects or opportunities. The national development banks really sit at the nexus of those four quadrants and are typically government-owned. And I see them as instrumental in the achievement of financing the SDGs. If I take the case of Nigeria, there are essentially four institutions that are owned by government. There is the Development Bank of Nigeria, which focuses on MSMEs. They are targeting 2 million Nigerian MSMEs. They have a strong focus on women-owned MSMEs. This is an organization, and it's partly owned by EIB and other international shareholders. It's a very important instrument for government to achieve the SDGs regarding SDG 6, SDG 8, et cetera. You've also got Bank of Industry. They issued a bond 2 years ago, 750 million euro. They are accessing private capital through their bond issuances. They are a critically important player for industry. You've got InfraCredit, which is the infrastructure, and Nigerian Exim Bank. These are four DFIs. To me, the national development banks, I say, are the unsung heroes of the global financial architecture. I was absolutely delighted to see them showing up in the Zero Draft. Three points for them. Number one is they have mandates that are aligned to SDGs. Well, that's their whole basis. If they don't have mandates and don't operate towards SDG alignment, they shouldn't exist. Secondly, the need for capacity building and technical assistance is critical. These are institutions that have been unpopular in the past for very good reason. Their governance structures have been, let's just say, compromised by political interference at times. Their credit processes have been less than good quality. And there is a need and a way to bring them up to standards that make them very efficient players. We've worked with 25 national development banks around the world or more and have a really good sense of that. And then the third point of on the FFD Zero Draft speaks to the regulation of national development banks. Those countries that put their NDBs under commercial bank regulations are missing the point. There's a case, I know we have a Zambian colleague here, will be aware of DBZ that had to be brought under receivership of the central bank. Why? I think for the reasons that I've just explained. You've got an NPL, non-performing loans of over 80%, and their capital adequacy ratios were well over the commercial bank standards. So there needs to be targeted regulation towards these national development banks. So I just want to advocate for their role in the ecosystem, the importance of them in the INFFs, and certainly in Nigeria we've made that case strongly. We've also worked in Malawi as well as Namibia, and Namibia has a very strong DBN, also a DBN, a Development Bank of Namibia. And so these are government instruments that really have potential to play a critical role by catalyzing private sector and co-financing along with sovereign wealth funds. There's a number of different initiatives and opportunities for them to be central to the INFF success stories. Thanks.
time is running away from us as usual, and I know that you're hungry, but yes, exactly, for more. So, colleagues, look, 5 minutes. Let's not miss the opportunity. It's such a great panel. It's a complicated subject, but somehow I'm getting clarity from the panel. But before I try and provide that clarity, any questions or perspectives? Hunger is overtaking your minds. You're fainting on the spot. Snacks at coffee were not enough. Let me put something, as I listened to this incredible panel, I really got very optimistic about how FFD4 can bring the level of collaboration that we need to deliver on the finance for sustainable development agenda. I heard from Egypt, from the Gambia, from Nigeria, that when the political leadership is there, then stakeholders follow. And I think that was very clearly articulated in each case. When the political leadership is there, domestic and international actors follow. So that is certainly something that we need to build as part of FFD4. I heard that, if there's an investment plan that is there, that it has clarity of purpose, that it's linked to data, it's linked clearly to the policy priorities a country wants to take forward, then it can promote collaboration across different actors. I heard how those investment plans need clarity, not just in terms of the development outcomes, but the ways in which enabling policy, project preparation and pipelines, public and private, how de-risking mechanisms need to be in place, and impact frameworks. If that's all there, then actors will follow, both international and domestic, with clarity on their roles in those investment plans. I think, that if those plans provide the results frameworks across different actors, we also have a common accountability mechanism in place to measure progress across our different interventions from different stakeholders, and importantly, to build accountability and trust with the citizens who ultimately we're all trying to serve in these domestic contexts. But finally, I also heard the need for stronger international collaboration. We need to make sure that in FFD4 we bring all parties to the table with a commitment to support these country-led processes. So I leave with some clarity of purpose. Mahmoud, you're not so clear, or you're even clearer?
Well, if everything is clear, some of us may not really find their job next day. No, I'm not going to complicate matters, but let me just get back into this issue of partnerships and the numbers. Yes. Especially in areas of great confusion about the alignments between the integrated national financial frameworks, the JETPs, which are project-specific, and then we have the NDCs, which is going to be the seasonal discussion in addition to what Seville is preparing us for, or what we are preparing for Seville as well. So take that. It's not a phone number, 2022, 11, 55, 110. 2022 is the year that flows of adaptation finance in water system, food security, resilience of infrastructure in cities were estimated for the whole continent of Africa. These are current flows. Estimates by the NDCs, including the one like Egypt, the 1% that includes mitigation and adaptation, is telling us what we need is 55. Independent valuation by UNEP is telling us the actual needs is 110. So this is the story. 11, 55, 110. 5 times or 10 times. That's why countries would go into this kind of underestimation of some of the costs that they know very well it will end up either by expensive borrowing or by the budget of the state is going to be funding the adaptation because it's not mitigation. So be mindful, because this is very much, regardless what happened in the White House the other day, they will call it something else. The US has the system of the resilience and investment to deal with the mess and the implications of climate change, from the floods to the fire. But for countries like Egypt, like the countries that now have average temperatures that have implications on lives and livelihoods, need to be prepared with better numbers, and that needs really to be put in the integrated national financial framework, needs to be put in the budget without generous assumptions of what will come from the ODA system or the international financial system, because it remains, and I close at this, it remains insufficient in funding, inefficient in the time it takes, and unfair because it may end up borrowing rather than getting grants or equity funding.
Thank you, Mahmoud. You've made a very important link for us to close on, which is also a link between Seville and Belém.
Exactly.
And the agenda of taking all sources of finance for climate and the SDG. So thank you so much, Mahmoud. I think this was a brilliant session. Thanks for your patience and withholding your hunger. Let's go now and have lunch. Yep. Tim, what time will we be coming back?
Sorry.
They like to eat. 2 o'clock,
2 o'clock.
so only
We'll
40 minutes for
40
lunch?
minutes. We'll come back for lunch at 2 o'clock.
Okay, it's only 40 minutes for lunch. We better get going. Thank you very much.